I have the privilege of introducing a friend and supporter of ISI, Ed Greer, who will be introducing our panelists today. Ed was a constituent of Senator Sessions for many years. He grew up in central Alabama in Shelby County. He joined the Air Force after college and served as a C-17 pilot, spent multiple deployments in support of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2003 to 2014. He left the Air Force to work at his family's manufacturing company, Davis Machine and Fab, and he has a beautiful wife and 3 children. Please join me in welcoming Ed Greer.
Thanks, Johnny. It's an honor to be asked to introduce the gentleman I'm going to introduce this afternoon. If Johnny hadn't told you I'm from the state of Alabama, you probably would have guessed pretty quickly by my accent. Like Johnny said, I grew up in central Alabama. I grew up in a town of about 10,000 people. That town's economy was centered and buttressed by a large textile mill. I was about 15 or 16 when NAFTA was passed. And of course, the mill didn't close right away. But a couple years after I went to college, it was unable to still compete under the new trade regime, and so slowly it closed, selling most of the large assembly equipment it had to firms and plants in Mexico. And of course, the town didn't suffer or visibly suffer immediately. I like to think of it as when your kid brings home that balloon from a birthday party, a friend's birthday party, and it's over there in the corner. But every couple of days, you come home and it's a quarter of the way down the wall. Come back, it's a slow leak. It's halfway down the wall. You tell your kid it's time to get rid of that balloon. They love the balloon. They won't let you. But I would come back on leave from the Air Force, and the town that I grew up in was visibly changing. And I'd come home once or twice a year, and maybe one visit I'd notice a civic organization that had been a big pillar of our community closed, or maybe it's a church, because the economic base that had supported the activity that fed those organizations had dried up, and nothing replaced it. The school changed, right? Because as my brother who spent so much time in education will tell you, a school is a reflection of the community. If your community's struggling, your school's going to struggle. So some might say, well, Ed, that's an anecdote from your hometown. You can't make public policy based on anecdotes. And I would tell you that if somebody spends enough time driving around this country, visiting towns like the town I grew up in, the anecdotal evidence kind of piles up that there's a large population or part of our country that our current economy is not working for. And if it reaches a critical mass, it's not going to just affect those communities, it's obviously affecting our country. So at least we can recognize there's a problem. And I'm not smart enough maybe for the answers. There's people in here that I think are. Senator Sessions spent as state attorney general and then 20 years in the Senate. And as the Attorney General has a lot of experience, and I've spoken with him, he has a lot of interesting ideas. I look forward to, as I know you guys do, to hear those. He's joined by Miss Rachel Bovard, who in 2013 was named by National Journal as one of the most influential women in Washington under 35. She's the Director of Policy at Conservative Partnership Institute now. I hope you guys will join me in welcoming both of them as we listen to their discussion about these problems.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Senator Sessions, for being here. I know we're all eager to hear from you. You've been working on these issues for a long time, many of which we've discussed. So one of the things I want to start with was when I first encountered you when I was a Senate staffer, I used to watch you go to the Senate floor where you would make speeches about what you called the masters of the universe. And at the time, I think you were referring to sort of the corporate and global leaders and really, I think, hinging onto something. This was years before Donald Trump, years before I think it became this national groundswell. So can you sort of talk about the masters of the universe?
Well, a lot of ways, the most effective advocacy is satire or mockery. And these people so fancy and so big for their britches, as we say in Alabama, and that you just need to take them down a notch. I remember one Saturday, I don't know why we were in session. They would never do that today. But we were in session, and John Kerry was running for president, and it was Saturday afternoon, and he was in Davos. Oh, in the great salons of Europe, while the country was in ruins, and he wanted to be our leader. So I had a little fun with that speech. And one time, Zuckerberg was demanding more foreign computer people. He had to have more people. And one of my great staffers found these articles where these big companies had laid them off. Like Microsoft, I think, had laid off 12,000. I believe Cisco laid off 40. We had about 10 of them. I gave a 2-hour speech. I'd read, so well, maybe Mr. Zuckerberg should call his friend Mr. Bill Gates. Maybe he could hire some of those people instead of bringing them in from abroad. What do you mean we've got this shortage in the computer? But anyway, that kind of thing was fun, and I had a good staff, and I do think maybe it was a trend changer to begin to question this idea that Silicon Valley was smarter and more knowledgeable just because they'd made billions and billions and had come up with these incredibly important technologies, no doubt about it. But that didn't mean they understood what it was like to be struggling have your plant closed in some place in Alabama. They had no concern about it. They have no concern whatsoever, really. And Marco said today something that I said a lot over the years, that these people are no longer American. They have transitioned. They are global. And he mentioned like stock. The stockholders are global in the great companies. And they got the American market. Now they want the Chinese market. And if China demands A, B, and C from them, they're happy to give it to them. And it's not their interest what's in the interest of the American people or somebody in rural Indiana. Now, give me a break. So I don't think we need to stand up. And who stands up for them is the politician, the government people, the public servant. I tried to remember I was a servant of the people. So I think J.D. Vance mentioned that last night. I don't know if he said the final explicit word, but these institutions have drifted from American institutions. They lack loyalty to America. They lack an understanding now, many of them, of what America is all about. And so the only antidote for that is the people. The only institution left, as he suggested last night, is the will of the American people. And that's what Donald Trump was so good about. I mean, we've been arguing about immigration and how many Zuckerberg should bring in from abroad, and he comes in and says, I'm going to build a wall. People understood that, right? It didn't take, so how you make the arguments, I don't know, but I do think we should not hesitate to take these CEOs down a notch. They're too big for their britches, as far as I'm concerned.
One of the things that you sort of just referenced is this importation of foreign labor into the American labor market, and it was something that you have been passionate about for a long time. This sort of the way big corporations exploit the H-1B visa system. I think Blake Masters, who's running for Senate in Arizona, put it recently something like, yeah, we lay these people off and we tell them to go learn to code, and then we say, oh wait, you can't do that either because we're gonna import a bunch of people to do it for you.
Right.
So you were a key champion of this in the Senate, but there haven't been that many that have followed you on the right in those footsteps. So can you just talk about why you think that is?
Yeah, they're scared to say that. Look, I don't, my great friend and Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, Harvard graduate, wrote the Rules of Civil Procedure in Alabama. He wrote me an email and he said, Jeff, populism has gotten a bad name. They were accusing me of being a populist, So he said, but nothing wrong with being an honest populist. If you're telling the truth, and the truth is you bring in excessive amount of labor the value of labor goes down. Give me a break. So we went 20 years before Trump in which wages in America increased less than inflation. So where does the Bernie Sanders come from? Newt Gingrich made this greatest speech in 1980. I had it for a while and I lost it. I don't think he remembers it because I asked him. But it was basically to win an election, you need to appeal to about 75% of the people and hope to get 50. And you need to have some opponents too. In 80, it was big fat Tip O'Neill who would sell the country out for a vote, and a drink. And Franklin Roosevelt, there was a steel industry, and he built a realigning election for 40 years off attacking big steel and big companies. So I think that we need middle America, median income was then about $50,000 a year. Half of America make less than $50,000 a year. You're going to win an election that you don't appeal to working people who make less than $50,000 a year? And Republicans read the Wall Street Journal, and what do they think? Uh-oh, wages are going up. That's bad. It's not bad if you're a politician. Isn't that what we want? Wages to go up, not down? Who are these people? And they have achieved a certain dominance out there, and to push back on these companies is dangerous. They've got big amounts of money. The second big battle over immigration, they raised $1 billion. They hired virtually every lobbyist in Washington. They even tamped down Fox News. But we beat it. And it was the last time it was just to the last vote. Actually, it passed the Senate. And they had to have a majority of the majority in the House, and Paul Ryan and NPR says, I think correctly, that they were ready to pass it in the House. They got the votes on Monday, and they were going to see the Speaker on Thursday, and Eric Canada lost in Virginia on immigration. And that was the end of that, So so the people are the forces. So we admit 1 million people every year to lawful residence in America, a guaranteed pathway, permanent resident to citizenship. That's a lot. How many more? So we're not against immigration. We're going to have immigration, but people need to come here to be assimilated. And a lot of people who come here are furious that they want to be assimilated and be a part of America and comply with the rules, and they have no sympathy for people who come illegally. I hear that, So I just would say the whole deal to me is that you need a party that's going to govern, and Newt says to govern is to impose your will. That's what you do when you govern. Impose your will. To govern, you got to appeal to a lot of people in this temple, the Republicans, and they're getting there. I mean, I liked what Marco said. I like what J.D. Vance is saying. But that's been a transition, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You were there when you didn't hear that talk much. I remember when the Republicans came up with an economic plan, maybe 14, one of our best senators, so good on economics. And I raised my hand. I said, where is the plank in our plan that we want wages to go up for working Americans? Because it wasn't in there. And he says, we need to put that in there. So he put it in there, but nobody, it didn't change the mindset of the people who were writing the plan. So I do think that what ISI and some other groups are saying is that governmental politicians have a moral obligation to the body politic, and that includes half of America that makes less than $60,000 a year, and wondering about how they're going to educate their children, what's going to happen if they're laid off, and all the things that you can imagine if mom's trying to go on a vacation, maybe get some school clothes for the kids, a new set of tires on the car, and it's got to go on a credit card. Have y'all looked at your credit card? Interest rate? Gee, it was, if you get something other than gasoline and tires, I think my credit card was 29.99% interest. I mean, so the average person is getting, it's hard for them out there. People are not sympathetic enough. It's immoral not to be a public leader and not to have sympathy and concern for a large portion of your constituency and not just, I'm sorry, talk too much, but not just worry about the masters of the universe.
It all comes back to the master. So, yeah, when we talk about sort of creating a right that addresses the issues of the working class more effectively, part of it, I think, is appreciating immigration as an economics issue, tight labor markets, all these things. But the other part of it, and we've talked about it a little bit at this conference, and Johnny put this question to Senator Rubio this morning that I want to put to you as well. Part of that is appealing to the labor constituency, which the right has really ignored for the last 30 to 40 years. So I'd put that question to you. Do you think the right can be pro-labor? What should the right be doing if they want to appeal to that constituency?
Well, we should be pro-worker, pro-American citizen. And I thought Marco kind of hit that just about right, because I heard what he said. He was saying that, well, you don't want to create this constant conflict between workers and management, which in the past the unions did. You want to, it's like Nick Saban at the University of Alabama, all the team wants to pull together. The first thing a good coach does is build a team. And the worker and the CEOs ought to be on the same team, and the workers ought to benefit, not just the CEO, when prosperity occurs. So I think that's good, but I did sign off with Orrin Cass on some pro-union thing. It said something nice about a union. First time in my career I've ever done that.
You did.
And maybe I shouldn't have, but I did, because I just thought the pendulum needs to come back a little bit.
Yeah, we were actually talking about the fact that you did sign that letter before this panel. So
wonder did you ask that question if you had that in your mind?
So one of the other questions I wanted to ask is, you sort of started your career, your political career anyway, and you spent a lot of time very much working in this sort of entrenched Bush Republican Party, which you were supportive of, right? You were with that team.
I was always.
So how have your views evolved in relation to that? And do you think, that the same things that were propelling you forward are now propelling the party forward away from that sort of very Bush, interventionist, globalist worldview?
Yeah, well, I think economically, the administration was probably populated with people who thought it bad when wages were going up, I'm kidding a little bit, but not much. That's basically true. I do think, and I was really loyal supporter of Afghanistan and the war in Iraq and but I began to wonder about it a lot. And it clearly was a mistake to think that we could go into Afghanistan and remake that culture. And it was wrong, really, to try to advance 1,000 years of changing in 5 years or something. So I thought, I was in the gym one morning, and Saturday morning, and this old Brit called in the Brian Lamb's, whatever that C-SPAN program, and we just invaded in Afghanistan. He said, "You have no idea what you've done. We've tried to do that before. It never will work. The Russians failed. You're going to fail. It's going to be a disaster." And I was like, "Oh, what have we done?" You know, but I remember my hair kind of stood up in the back of my neck. And then a week or so later, they had, you know, our people standing up cheering because the smart bombs were hitting them and we were won the war and it was a glorious thing and everything was going to be wonderful and Bush now going to create a democracy in Afghanistan that was going to lead the whole Middle East to democracy and improve the disastrous dictatorial policies and the world's going to be the greatest place ever, right? That's what they thought. And I sort of said some things along that line myself, but it didn't work so well. I just think the one that's clearest to me was Syria. Syria was a healthy country. A banker man, a PhD at Florida State, was telling me he was in Greece. They would go to Aleppo. They could have meals. They could have a drink. All you had to do was not cross Assad, and you could do business. There was peace, you know, and an effective government and a fairly educated population. And then Obama says Assad's got to go, if y'all remember that. He also said it'd be gone in months, so many months. And we end up, what, 200,000 people dead, whole cities demolished, the economy in shambles, and Assad still in power? It's not good enough to have good intentions. This is serious business when you deploy the military of the United States of America to try to accomplish something. You better be sure. That's one thing I learned. I didn't give it enough thought. I don't think most of the senators do. They vote based on how the mood of the media is and how their party is saying, and they assume somebody somewhere knows what they're doing, but they don't often know what they're doing. And as senators have to stand up and be counted.
Do you think the right has learned that lesson, though? I think back just a couple of years ago when there was sort of a uniparty coalition to stop a vote on the resolution for withdrawing or disapproval from the military action in Yemen. More than once, the Republicans try to avoid taking these votes. There was news broke, I think yesterday, that there have been legislation introduced to authorize military action in Cuba. You know, have we learned this lesson?
Got to be careful, I'm telling you. You just got to be careful when you deploy the United States military. They're the greatest military ever. If anybody ever went in that heat in Iraq and see them wear those Kevlar vests and those helmets in 120 degrees and out there and never know if you're going to step on a mine or something, we are the great, and we should be careful about how we deploy them. And people don't want to be held to account, like on a Yemen vote. They like to avoid the vote.
Yeah.
And leaders on both sides negotiate with leaders on the other side, and they cut deals so you don't have to vote. But basically, American people send you to Washington to vote, right? That's what they send you there for.
In the time that we have left before we open it up to questions, I want to ask you about something that we were emailing about actually before this interview. Something you said struck me. You said you were highlighting the divergence that has emerged on the right between conservatives and libertarians, which once created sort of a very, strong political coalition. And you were noting the divergence, and you said, but to win, we still have to stick together. And so I want to put that question to you. Do you think that an ideological coalition in this day and age, based on some of the issues that we're talking about that need to be important to the right, do you think that political coalition is still possible?
Yes.
How?
I think it's essential. I mean, like, how are you going to get to 70%, like Newt says, if you don't have libertarians and classical conservatives together? I believe it was Johnny on the maybe it was on the website here of ISI. It said, conservatism is a state of mind. My friend Bob Terrell, the editor of the American Spectator, from the time I was in college or high school, he's still the editor, but great guy. He says conservatism is not an ideology, it's a cast of mind. It's a way of looking at things. The old Brit calls in, said, "Are you sure you thought this through? I don't think you have. I think you're going to regret this." Woo. Oh, is anybody ever thinking about those things carefully? How much debt can we create? With things going along pretty good, you sure we need to spend $5 trillion on this economy? How much is that? What will that do to us? You know, a few years ago, we had a $1 trillion deficit. People panicked over that. Now we got $5 trillion, all that was just forgotten. So I do think that conservatism is a cast of mind, not an ideology. Sometimes libertarianism crosses into ideology. I remember having Greenspan before one of our committees. I think he was Greenspan. And I asked him, well, what if we're trading with a nation and they won't buy anything from us, and they want us to buy all kinds of things from them? Should we keep buying from them? And most of you sophisticates would know what the answer is, although the average American would say, heck no, we don't buy from them. But he said, yes, of course. And I consider that to be a religious free trade position. It's a religion. When our people went, that's what Trump was saying. That's why I really liked what he said about it. He said, our people go there and don't defend our interest. I don't blame the other countries. They defend their trading interest. Who's defending our interest? And I think, I'm not certain about this, but I think the cast of mind of our negotiators was they went there with one goal, and that's to reduce tariff barriers and tariffs and trade barriers, not to protect American industry or American jobs. But that's not what the other side, you think the Chinese godless communists believe in anything like free trade? Give me a break. They are looking to use our philosophical approaches to get around us and take advantage of us. And we can't not have a steel industry just because they can make steel a little cheaper. We can't let Huawei do our 5G network like we were heading to do. And probably if Trump hadn't got elected, it might have happened. Australia stood up. The Brits cut a deal with Huawei. And Trump, to his credit, said, you're out of our Five Eyes intelligence network if your network's been sponsored by the Chinese communists. And so they figured out a way to retreat. But I'm just saying that we have real national security interest. A great nation has got to be able to build ships. It's got to be able to build aluminum. It's got to be able to build batteries and have the kind of rare earths, minerals to do so. And it's just, it's not as simple as a religious free trade as to who can get a nickel cheaper in the product, in my opinion. Although I do believe in trade, I absolutely believe free markets are the core of any sound economy. And when you raise taxes or regulations or tariffs or trade barriers, that's a compromise with the ideal. But I think President Trump was correct to say we're going to protect our interest here. And that broke with a lot of the orthodoxy we were hearing.
But I guess that sort of gets to the larger question of he did shatter a lot of orthodoxy on the right for how we looked at things like trade, how we looked at things like immigration, and that has very much put a divide in what was once a political coalition designed around this sort of what you referred to as this religious zeal toward a certain type of trade. So do you think that we can continue as a movement together with those two opposing views? On one hand, a more Trumpian view of trade, which sort of will use tariffs, again, to your point, in the interest of getting to free trade, and then people who say, no, the only free trade we can have is whatever the other country wants.
Yeah, well, I hate to tell you, but the people in this room don't control it. It's the American voters. And I remember in the first election, I talked to Stephen Miller, who'd worked with me and went over with Trump. And he said, if we can get the Republicans up to where we were last time, we're going to win. And that was like 97% of Republicans voting for Trump. 96 or something. It was a high number. And they got there. So who are the people unhappy with Trump's agenda? Somebody in this room, probably. The
masters of the universe, that's it.
Yeah, the masters of the universe. So yeah, I think the American people were there. I think that Trump was right on three big issues. We need to defend American interest on the world stage with trade. We could no longer be taken advantage of. We need to secure the border. And we've gotten involved in too many wars and spending too much money killing people, and it's not to anybody's advantage. I thought all those were basically true, honestly true. That's where the American people were. So is that populism, to listen to the American people? So I kind of, as I said, I was over there on free trade, all of that. I guess my learning experience came when I felt the power. The velvet came off the iron fist when we started fighting immigration. And you could feel these interest groups, and they were not friendly. And it was a battle to the death. Somehow the American people held together, and we beat it 3 different times. But, yeah, okay, I've said enough about that, I guess.
So we can open it up to questions if you guys want to start lining up. Oh, I know you were going to text me questions from the app, but I forgot my phone. I'm actually a failure as a millennial because I forgot my phone. Yeah, we can start here.
Oh, speaking of generations, first of all, thank you both for speaking and lending us your time. Very much appreciate that. My question, Mr. Honorable Sessions, is concerning my generation. I'm very interested to know, what do you believe is a good direction that my generation is headed in, Generation Z, if any, if they're, maybe you think our generation's totally lost. And also, I'd be interested to know, what do you think is a bad direction my generation is headed in? And I'd love to hear what you think is gives you hope in my generation, if any.
Well, I think that's a big, important question, because in a democratic republic, I don't think the government is going to be any better than the quality of the human beings that make it up and vote. And so I worry that if families are destabilized, but we have had pendulum swing in this country. It really feels a lot to me now like when Reagan got elected. There were riots in the streets, there was drugs, make love not war, radicals, actual radicals, they call themselves. So the pendulum came back now, and so I'm not too negative about the future, but I think ISI, I think First Things, I really like what they're saying, I think we've had rebounds in religious values in the country before. I think that's important to me. And without it, I don't see how we can be a great nation.
Any criticisms of my generation?
Well, in many ways, I would say that the older generation has not taught this generation effectively. I know that's a trend, probably. It would have been hard to, but I do think good teachers who understand how America was founded, that this was the most liberal advancement of government in the history of the world, in 1776. Nothing had ever been done like this before. And yeah, they didn't fix all the problems day one, particularly slavery and the evil of slavery. That was not fixed, but within 80 years it was fixed. Over half the country barred slavery, and where it was endemic around the world. So I do think that, and that's just a teaching of realism, it seems to me. I mean, realistically, if you know history and you actually thought about it very much in a practical sense, you know that you can't fix everything at once. And that's some excessive visionary thing. So they took an evolutionary advancement of the British system and parliaments and created Congress and Constitution. It works so doggone good, it's almost unbelievable how blessed we've been, and we should be able to teach that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you a question from the app from Shelby, which I love this question actually. How do we knock down these global industry CEOs enough to scare them back into changing their focuses to being America-centric? Great question, Shelby.
That's a good question, and I don't think you can. I think power is and interest are dominant, and an interest of a CEO, a global company, is to advance the global company's interest. And about a decade ago, I said on Laura Ingraham one time, their interest is not coterminous with the American interest. And she just went on, she loved that, you know. That's a lawyer that she is. She said, that is great, that's right. But their interest is not the same as ours.
Okay, take one here.
Hi, Senator. Thank you. Bryce from American Moment.
Yeah, Bryce.
My question is about being a young Christian in D.C. and in the public policy sphere in general. I'm just wondering, what are some of your guiding principles for somebody, what should be the guiding principles of somebody coming into D.C., which isn't exactly, I would say, a very Christian place, and kind of bringing into their Christian perspective of humility and justice and prudence into a sphere that maybe doesn't always encourage those perspectives?
I really think that's a challenge of our time. You know, Washington and Jay said that it's hard to imagine morality can be sustained. If you don't believe in God, why do you believe in anything? You know? So I do think it's a dangerous thing in our country if we continue the secularization trend. And I will tell you, I've said for many years that the dividing line fundamentally in Washington today is between the secularists and the people with religious order in their lives. And so I don't know what will happen, but I would suggest there's some excellent writing out there. First Things is premier good, and Touchstone magazine. I don't know what else. There's a lot more, I'm sure. But I've started reading both of those, and First Things helped me with the Trump thing. They were saying some things that I thought were really insightful that helped me understand and be more confident that the Trump agenda was important for America. So yeah, I think the secular religious divide is very significant, and you have to, in this hostile age, people of faith have got to expend more knowledge in forming their own foundation, religious foundation. I don't think that the purpose of religious faith is to save America. I think that's backwards. I mean, religious faith is to take care of your, you know, and if the country goes to the dogs, you do your duty as a citizen to try to help it, put it on the right path. But fundamentally, your religious faith is between you and the Lord, as James Madison said. Nobody gets between you and the Lord. That's your world. You're ordained with certain inalienable rights. One of them is the right of religious faith. So not a very good answer.
No, it was. Thank you. It was.
Senator Sessions, you touched on the issue of unionization in your earlier remarks. Would you care to comment on the idea of works councils which, without electing big union bosses such as the AFL-CIO, give workers a voice in the actual day-to-day decisions made by the companies that they work at?
Yeah, I think any good business needs to be listening to the workers and building team spirit. So I think that has real potential. A lot of the companies where stock ownership is owned by workers, a couple of them in Huntsville are very effective high-tech companies that operate on the stock ownership principle too. So I think there are ways to bring them together.
Thank you, Senator.
So another one from the app, this one's from Nick, I think builds off one of the last questions I asked you. How do conservatives, libertarians, neoconservatives, paleoconservatives, and other conservative factions build a new coalition to implement common policy goals?
Well, I thought in his own way, unique way, Donald Trump sort of did that. He appointed, I was so worried about the judges, and he appointed the best judges any president's ever appointed. You know, they were great judges. A lot of them are Christians, and, you know, sincere, thoughtful Christians. So, but that was a good deal, but so business community should first and foremost want a stable economy and government where when they're sued in court and they are right and due to win, they win and don't lose to some mob, and that keep taxes low. Libertarians believe in all of that. So do classical conservatives. Some libertarians say, well, if everybody wants to fornicate out on the square, that's all right, I don't care. Some classical Americans prefer not to have that happen. But so all of that is, to me, are fairly minor differences, really. Part of getting to that, you know, half of America. I mean, everybody, you get half of America, they're going to have some. And I'll tell y'all one more principle of politics. The people in the middle are not moderates. Write this down if you don't know this already. They are a squirrely bunch. I mean, one minute they'll vote for Barack Obama, and the next minute Donald Trump. They're not happy. They think the country's a bunch of corrupt politicians that's screwing. They're stupid in Washington. They made this regulation that it makes their life miserable. Their schools are screwed up. And they'll swing back and forth. And showing a certain fierceness of willingness to take on the media and all of that, that's what people liked about Trump. He wasn't part of the establishment, which they weren't happy. They'd gone 20 years, their wages hadn't gone up. I'm telling you that. While the billionaires are making billions. So I think that that awareness, we get our people, the conservatives, the libertarians, the religious, the traditionalists, whatever, free market, Milton Friedman people, all of those, that's us. That's who we are fundamentally. And within that group, we got to be careful that anything that one group insists on doesn't run off more votes, and then you don't have 50 anymore. You got to win. You just got to win this. We need to win this next election. I think the foundation is there to win. An affirmation of classical conservative religious values, lower taxes, less regulation, free market, lawfulness at the border, an interest in protecting the American people, caution about getting involved in wars all over the globe. How more remote place could you ever find to have a war than Afghanistan? And
Well,
that kind of
we would find it.
Yeah. And so we got to be, those kind of things are what common sense American people want, really. And I go back to it, they were right. The politicians were wrong to have the border shambles, to have not defended our trading interest effectively and getting into too many wars. The American people were right about that. And so we may need to be dadgum sure when we nominate somebody for office or president that they understand that.
We have time for one more question, I think. Toss it to you.
Well, thank you very much. Joseph Prudhomme, Washington College. One of the trends that I've found especially problematic has been the proliferation of measures to legalize recreational marijuana, now psychedelics. I know when you were Attorney General, you actually took steps to maybe have a more assertive position relative to the Supremacy Clause and state legalization efforts. Could you speak a little bit about what you think we can do with respect to drug policy in the United States?
I was going to ask the exact same thing.
Well, I don't think marijuana is a medicine. Count me out, okay? It's never been tested in any significant way. But our view simply was that Congress had voted to make it illegal, and the Attorney General didn't have a choice but to follow the law. We certainly didn't make it a high priority. And the federal agents were not arresting people for even a pound of marijuana unless it was part of some thing. I mean, they were looking at 600 pounds, boatloads, and all that. But then you have, so I think it's time for us to be more, to study harder about the impact of it, you know, how dangerous it is. Somebody here from Boston, two people in Boston, half a dozen years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, said that the one was associated with Harvard, one was a counselor, they were partners of substance. She said that, I don't care what they say, everybody that's addicted started on marijuana. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous thing, and people need to be careful about it. And many people use marijuana, and they think that's good, and maybe it helps them. But we certainly don't have many people in jail, state or federal, based on any small amount of marijuana. That's a total misrepresentation. Most cities hadn't been prosecuted, even, you know, an ounce or so. None of that's been particularly prosecuted. So I don't know. It's an issue we'll have to wrestle with. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not booting out libertarians who don't agree with me on marijuana. We got to hold together. You know, we got to be in this. We got to win the next election, not figure out what fights to pick amongst ourselves.
Well, on that note, we started with Masters of the Universe. We ended with marijuana. I think this has been a great discussion. Please join me in thanking Senator Jeff Sessions.